If there's one certainty about the human condition as we know it today, it truly is that we rarely have any patience for anything. If we try something new and don't immediately enjoy it, we tend to toss it aside and go try something else. This applies to everything: movies, TV, music, food, and of course, video games. But you might find that if you actually do exercise just a little bit of that old patience chewy, you might just find yourself rewarded for sticking it out. Hi folks, today on this video, we have 12 games that start slow but finish like masterpieces. Starting off at number 12, it's BioShock, and yes, we're talking about the original. It is a wonderful game start to finish. The opening is awesome with the plane crash, and you slowly descend into the city contained inside of a gigantic aquarium or whatever. But once you get past the opening, like the first hour develops at a fairly slow pace. It's engrossing, yet a little bit plodding. And I don't think necessarily you needed the twist at the end to make it exciting, but man, does it make it exciting. The whole final third of BioShock is like one of gaming's biggest twist endings, and yes, that's plural. There are multiple reveals which completely recontextualize the plot and even some of the basic aspects of the gameplay, like even how you, the player, are being manipulated. Not just the guy you're controlling, but the actual player of the game. It's such a clever idea. I won't spoil it for anybody who hasn't played it at this point, but it is very, very good. It's mind-blowing when you first see it, and it's just really a lot of fun to play the whole section leading up to the final boss of this game. It turns BioShock's slow pace into like a total whirlwind. It's one of those things that really cements that it's one of the greatest games of all time, and somehow Ken Levine keeps making those. BioShock Infinite is also one of the greatest games of all time. And number 11 is Yakuza 0. Now, I can really say almost any Yakuza game, they all start very slow. That's kind of the series' whole modus operandi. There's like long cutscenes, carefully setting up the story, going through everything that is possibly important early, and then eventually everything starts to coalesce. But I think Yakuza 0 is the most extreme example of this. The game opens up with like an hour of cutscenes and basic tutorials before you're actually set loose in the open world. And even then, the story proceeds at a leisurely pace for the entire Chapter 1. I'll admit, it's a little bit of a hard sell. Some people would say your patience will eventually be rewarded, but I think sometimes it doesn't on some games. Yakuza 0 is not one of the games that doesn't, though. It gets great. But again, it's a little bit of a hard sell. If you're going in blind, you're probably going to be wondering what is actually so good about this stuff and why you're stuck walking between quest markers that are just like streets away from each other while characters recite pages and pages of dialogue. It's hard to see where it's going, but by Chapter 3, you'll just be sucked into the story and these characters. It takes about as long as a short game to really catch you, but once you're in deep, and it just keeps getting better. There really isn't anything out there quite like a Yakuza game. And Yakuza 0, it's like the most current introduction point for the series at this point. If you're gonna do one, do it. And it takes a while, but it's worth it.
It wasn't meant to amuse, but to prod you to hurry. It's midday already.
At number 10 is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which if you're on the internet, you've heard somebody talk about how it starts slow and ramps up. And I am here to double down on that, because it really does. Not everybody loves the opening of the game, and it's even slower if you don't know what you're doing, and you don't bother with the quest in the starting town of White Orchard. Sometimes it can be a lot of riding the horse and not a lot of doing stuff, and like I said, if you don't know what you're doing, you're not doing a lot of anything for a while. So if you're not a big fan of open world games, it's honestly hard to say if you'll really end up vibing with The Witcher 3. But, and a big but, The Witcher 3 is one of the most bearable video game slogs if you're not a fan of open worlds. The world is really what you get into first if you're not one of those people, and then you start realizing, oh wait, everything is really well written and in-depth. And then you start realizing at some point there must be like an end game here, where all of the stuff gets tied together and we get maybe a big emblematic final mission or battle of some kind that recontextualizes everything that we don't know about except on a smaller level. And then that part of your brain is like, yeah man, it's really smart, narratively, really well done. Basically, The Witcher 3 is like the open world game for open world games where nothing even happens, where they learn how to make something happen. It's just a phenomenal game. If you're a story person who just doesn't really care for open worlds, if you hate fun, I guess you could call yourself, then this game is one that you're going to love if you do just happen to stick it out.
Who's that?
Ignore him.
But why's he up there?
At number 9 is Horizon Zero Dawn. They always say good things come in threes, and yes, we just did 3 open world games, but Horizon is a completely different experience from those other 2. Instead of slowly exploring the world to discover its little narratives and side stories, this game is much more structured in how it progresses. You don't really have like the full breadth of your abilities, and you're railroaded through a long, relatively linear opening and horizon. It takes pretty long before you're really let loose. The sense of progression in this game, though, is really strong, and it only gets stronger as it goes on. The way the mystery of the world unravels is just really compelling. And that final scene where everything's laid bare and you finally understand what's going on in this world and why it is the way it is, like the moments like that, the rare ones in games, and it makes Horizon Zero Dawn feel incredibly satisfying by the end. And look, I know exposition dumps are not normally the way to conclude the story of a game, but Guerrilla Games makes it work here. The reveals are so interesting that the fact you get all this stuff explained to you in a room is like not only forgivable, but it rules. The whole game builds to this moment, and it just ends with a bang. It's one of those games where, when you first get through the setup, it's engaging, but not necessarily all that different from other similar games. But by the end, it just feels like it completely gets into its own track, and it's awesome. And number 8 is Disco Elysium. Here's a game you really need to be in the right mood to play, or you might just end up quitting 20 minutes in and not giving it a real shot. It's a dialogue-heavy detective game that moves at its own pace and is very different from any of its contemporaries. It doesn't start with some big epic set piece or an important choice or even an easily followed plot. It just starts with a guy who wakes up in a trashed apartment, and from there, it's just a matter of figuring out who he is, why he trashed the apartment, what he's supposed to be doing, all while constantly hectoring him in your own headspace. What's going on doesn't even become clear until much later, but by that point, man, you're sucked in and you're desperate to get to the bottom of the mysteries. The game is essentially all set up and then all payoffs, and the payoff is fantastic. Disco Elysium is one of those games that just keeps building and building in intensity, and it requires a little patience, but you'll end up hooked. And when it finally lets you go, you're just left wondering, what the hell did I just play? But in a good way, man, in such a good way. At number 7 is Outer Wilds, and yeah, another one that doesn't really make its intentions clear or what it's really about off the bat. But this time, it's not even really clear until much later. It starts with a little home planet, some friendly faces, and a lot of confusing sights as you explore the solar system. There truly isn't another game out there quite like Outer Wilds. It's one of those games that just refuses to hold your hand in any way. There's a plot, but it's hidden in logs and obscure clues. The point of the game isn't even clear until you stumble onto the fundamental gameplay conceit, which is, well, listen, there's a lot of cool secrets in this game, so I don't want to talk a lot of specifics. But trust me when I say the game takes a long time to ramp up. But once it gets going, you'll never forget it. Like I said, nothing else is like this game. I don't even have another game I can compare this game to at this point. Normally, I compare it to something as inaccessible as many people think Death Stranding may be. There are a number of comparisons I can draw with various other games and other media. Outer Wilds, I truly have nothing. It's just one of those things you need to experience for yourself, but it starts slow, that's for sure.
You came through then.
I don't break that easy, name notwithstanding.
At number 6, it's the aforementioned Death Stranding, which is like the wait, it gets better game. Like just about any conversation about Kojima's unusual open-world walking simulator is going to have those 4 words, it gets better, trust me. That's it. If you're familiar with these Hideo Kojima guys' games, then the strange world and cryptic cutscenes that open the game are going to be something you're familiar with. But for the uninitiated, I think it makes you wonder what the hell this is that everyone's always talking about. Death Stranding just throws you in at the deep end from the start, and not in the good way, the confusing, weird way where nothing makes sense. It's obtuse both in story and in mechanics, and the gameplay is intentionally limiting and difficult to get a handle on. But wow, does it get satisfying once you really understand the mechanics and to some extent, the story, which slowly unfurls the secrets of this bizarre world. The crazy thing is that by the end, everything makes sense and is satisfying in its own completely unique way. Death Stranding is one of those few games where it almost has to start slow, so you get a chance to figure out the complicated gameplay systems. But once it all finally clicks, it feels very satisfying to play. They probably could have introduced things in a way that is more palatable to average human beings, but it's Hideo Kojima. Why would he do that?
Wake him up. No dozing.
At number 5 is Persona 5. If you've played a Persona game before 5, you probably think you know how it's going to be paced, and you're right, it's going to be slow at the start. But I think nobody was really imagining just how long it takes to get going. The opening dungeon, it's like a really damn long tutorial, and that also goes for the real-world side of things. There's some interesting stuff going on behind the scenes of these characters' lives, such as your main character having run-ins with a prototypical JRPG real-world situation that is very slow-moving. I don't know if I've seen another fantasy game that moves at this pace, to be frank. It takes a long time for things to really click and for you to get properly absorbed into this world. But by the end, it's one of the best RPGs in years. It just takes so long to get there, but once you're sucked in, you're in. And by the time the credits roll, you know that playing through this game for over 100 hours wasn't wasted. But compared to earlier games in the series, this one, whoa, what a slow burn it is. Jumping into a Persona game with the sequel Persona 5 Strikers, not in any way related to be the intro on gimmicks, but if you're wondering what it would be like if a Persona game did go in the exact opposite direction, Strikers goes in the exact opposite direction. I mean, it really does illustrate how long it takes Persona 5 to get going, because that takes virtually no time. But if you have an appetite for delayed gratification, then Persona 5 is the game for you. You'll have a lot more gratification, and it's going to come a lot more often because of the delay.
It's just a scratch.
You've been at that sword play again, haven't you?
And number 4 is Kingdom Come Deliverance, a game that really doesn't hide its slow nature. It takes a long time for everything to be properly introduced, only for things to finally get going and then, oh wait, here comes the tutorial. It's a realistic game, but it's not the easiest to control and understand at first. The survival systems are there, but not well explained. The combat is a mystery at first, and man, it doesn't hold your hand if you get in trouble either. Things can get pretty bad really quickly, but there's a lot of setup before you even get to all that stuff. And it takes even longer for the training wheels to finally come off and for you to get the freedom to explore the open world. But once you're finally let loose, oh man, it becomes one of the best RPGs out there, with an interesting and fun to explore world and a story that's uncommonly well told. Hey, I know you might be pissed off that you wasted an hour on a side quest that ends up being a prank or, one of the game's many other pitfalls for people who just dive in not knowing what it actually is, but trust me, it is worth it. If nothing else, wait for the end of the prologue when things really start kicking off and you got some momentum before giving up. If you give up and you don't get to that point, it's going to be the game that got away for you. If you're a serious RPG guy, you are going to love this game, but it takes its sweet time.
Who did this?
Probably the same people been ghosting us.
That doesn't answer the question. Don't worry. I think we're about to find out.
At number 3 is Spec Ops: The Line, which, listen, there's probably not a game out there that comes as close to just tricking people into ignoring it as Spec Ops: The Line. It looks generic, it plays generic, it begins generic, and it only slowly transforms into one of the best video game stories I could tell you about in the past decade, probably even longer. You don't have to wait that long to get in on the action, but it starts off pretty slow and normal for a cover shooter about military dudes shooting each other in the Middle East desert. It does have some sandstorms and stuff, which looks cool and unique, but there's really nothing remarkable about it at first. But once things go sideways, they go sideways. That's when the game does a nosedive into absolute madness, and it really does not stop until the bitter end. Trust me, anyone who has played Spec Ops: The Line will all tell you the same thing. Keep going, because it gets insane, and oh, does it ever. This is a special kind of game that doesn't really exist anymore, and probably there was only one of them, to be frank. Spec Ops: The Line certainly isn't a masterpiece by every metric. The gameplay is good, but it's standard cover shooter, meh stuff. But man, the story is so worth experiencing. Even if you're spoiled on some of the stuff, seeing it all play out, it's different, and it's awesome.
Mission complete and all that, huh? The Goliaths were wiped out, and we secured a route into enemy territory.
At number 2 is Nier Automata, a game that actually moves pretty quickly, all things considered. You start with an action-packed opening sequence, and the cutscenes are kept to a minimum at first. And it's not until you reach the prologue, it's like an hour-long point of no return with no save point until afterward, that the game opens up. But I mean, that's also kind of interesting. It's not as slow to unfurl as some of the other games we're talking about here, but it does take a lot to beat, really. Once you get to the first ending, that's when things start getting interesting. It sounds like I'm saying, oh, when the game's over, it gets good. That's because I'm pretty close to saying that, but no, it gets good before that, and there's a lot to the game after that. You don't have a complete picture of the story, so you go through a second playthrough as the other android, and this time things are different. The gameplay's different, you've new info on what's going on, and the second half of the game is completely new, and it gets weirder with the different switch-ups. Narratively, this is where things go from being a typical video game story to one of the most original and show-stopping finales in video games. I am not going to ruin it. You haven't seen anything like what Automata does in its finale. It's crazy. Another game where it lands on its own thing, like Outer Planets, seriously. The second half of the game does get stuck in a rut for a little while, but once it pulls out, it goes, and then it goes, and it doesn't stop going. While I'm not the biggest fan of literally everything Yoko Taro has ever done, Automata is pretty magnificent by the end.
Snuff and stash those lanterns, boys. Best you two lie low on this.
And finally, at number 1, it's Red Dead Redemption 2. Pretty much everyone will agree the game starts off slow. Compared with the average open world game, this is a tortoise crawling through molasses. It opens with a very slow, methodical tutorial story that throws you in a lot of the game's story, but not a lot of the game's meat. It gets bogged down in almost incessant tutorials. It is a little tiresome, but if you can stick it out, what comes after the prologue is literally one of the best games ever made. Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of the few open world games where the story is legitimately worth experiencing. So this is a game where the early slow pace is an asset, actually. The devotion to realism and complex characters makes the story feel like it has a lot of gravitas. Things feel like they're really changing as you progress, as the camp becomes more and more strained, and the once harmonious gang slowly starts to fall apart at the seams. The whole game just has a feeling of impending tragedy. You know things are going to get worse, you just don't know how. And the funny thing about this game is that for everything we've said that's really encouraging you to stick it out, the game continues to be slow even during the late stages, where it becomes legitimately action-packed and fast-paced. One of the rare cases where the slow pace is the entire game, but it uses it to build to this emotionally heavy, sprawling epic. It's one of those rarest of rare things. Its ending genuinely feels earned, and the emotional roller coaster gets to you, even if you know the plot and all the spoilers ahead of time. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a real special one, and the way it gets there really depends on the slow, early game stuff. I don't know if that's necessarily why everybody gets frustrated with it, but it's absolutely integral. Like I said, one of the best games of all time.